This is North Pod, a North Melbourne fan podcast, hosted by Jason Hunt.
Larkey! Stevenson with his own move. Carlton! North are in front!
Hello and welcome back to North Pod. And isn't this a much more familiar feeling, unfortunately? Compete for a quarter and then fall apart. It has a familiar ring to it. We've done this a fair bit at the start of the season, just giving round 5 2024, to be honest. A disappointing result against the Swans. We'll talk all about in the podcast. Plenty to unpack from, what was ultimately a really disappointing game. It started off with a bit of promise, but then, pretty quickly during that second quarter, it faded away. And I don't think there's any shame in losing to the Swans. It definitely would have been great to be a lot closer than we were. But I think we've had a really competitive, 5-week block prior to that. And hopefully this is a bit of an anomaly and we can bounce back for another block upcoming. We do have quite a tough patch coming up, unfortunately. So anyway, look, as I say, we're plenty to talk about. So we'll go through it. Everything's here in the podcast. North Podium, positives and negatives. Story of the game, bit of a look at the VFL as well, which was a positive result for us for this week. So it's not all doom and gloom, even if the AFL match result was certainly relatively doom and gloom. Team selection is where we always like to start, and as you'd expect, we kept the team pretty consistent after our win against the Suns last week. Just Georgie Wardlaw back after his concussions, and Will Phil made way, and Curtis Taylor was the sub. There certainly was a bit of fervour on the North Online channels around, whether or not this was a fair or just outcome. I think everyone kind of wants Will Phil to have a bit of consistency in the side, and I also would love him to have some consistency, and I really want him to work out. We saw some great results from him tagging, and then I don't think he was fantastic against the Suns. But unfortunately, it's just the old, if we're going to bring Wardlaw back in, Will Phil is the most like for like. In an ideal world, structure-wise, if you ignore the structure, I think Liam Shields or Curtis Taylor missing is probably more desirable than having Will Phil miss, but they're more wingers and flankers, so it would disrupt the structure a bit if we took one of them out for Will Phil, so I do get it, and I'm sure, I've got no doubt there'll be some people talking around, gee, it would have been great to have a tagger to put on Warner or to put on Gulden, given the impact they had on the game. But, I do think that is a little simplistic because, sure, if you're able to put an effective tag on one of those players, it does have an impact on the game, but they're pretty tough players to tag. I don't know if he's got the wheels to go with Warner, and I don't know if he's got the endurance to go with Gulden. So, it's all well and good to say, gee, it would have been great if Will Phil could be in there and putting the clamps on, but that doesn't mean that he would be able to do it. Although we have seen him do a fantastic job against Dacos, for example. So, look, he's unlucky. He went back into the VFL and had a solid game, but I totally get it. There's only so many midfield spots available, and when Will Phil is not as flexible as someone like Tommy Powell, who can go to half forward and have a bit more of an impact, it makes it tough because really he's playing on ball or he's on the bench. So, yeah, that's what the team selection looks like, but you'd expect not a lot of change based on the positive result against the Suns, and that's what we got. The only other thing to note there was it's Tristan Sherry's 50th game. And unfortunately, similar to LDU a couple of weeks ago, he did not have a great milestone game. We'll talk about it in a minute. He wasn't bad, but certainly wasn't up to his super high standards that he's had for the rest of the year, I didn't think. So, match result, Sydney 2018 138 defeated us. North Melbourne 9-5, 59, 38 scoring shots to 14. Tells the story. Sydney could have had a larger score. They kicked a little inaccurately. You could add a couple onto that because there was also a couple of shots that just didn't make the distance. So it was a thorough belting. There was certainly a time there where it looked like it could get out to a 100-point loss. Fortunately, it didn't. We were able to kick a couple more goals and just shore up that score. But Yeah, it was a dirty day for us, unfortunately. Story of the game. It's an interesting one because I think visually watching it, you could definitely see where it was lost for us, but the stats told that story, but not necessarily in the most traditional sense. I thought we were beaten out of the middle of the ground and around the contests pretty thoroughly. And as a result of that, the defence was put under immense pressure, and they didn't handle it super well. But I guess I want to highlight it's not all their fault. Some of the ball coming in was pretty pristine and pretty hard to defend. So, a little from column A, a little from column B on that one. But the midfield I thought was really quite soundly beaten. But then you look at the numbers and you go, okay, well, we actually won the contested possessions by 3, so we were getting our hands on it. But it was spread that really killed us. We lost the clearances 38-34, so, pretty close there. The hitouts was 45-26, so Grundy was getting his hand on it a lot more than Sherry was, and, giving the Swans relatively good service. I think that, in general, unfortunately, Sherry just got out-muscled in the ruck, but we'll talk more about the ruck battle a little bit later on. But like I said, and I think, you could just put the old podcast on repeat for this one. Its quality of clearance was really disparate for us. We were smashed in the spread, and you saw it time and time again. The Swans' ability to find space and work, just work harder away from the contest, particularly after quarter time, was the difference in the game. They just found space where we weren't able to, and that's what allowed them to exit the stoppage at the front end, go deep inside 50, and it's a relatively small ground, the SCG. If you're winning it around the source and at the contest and you're able to get clean disposal going forward, it's really hard to stop. And we were really punished by the Swans. We made several really silly mistakes or slipped over at crucial times in the middle and were also punished, which, just really added insult to injury. The perfect example of that, it was the third quarter. We just kicked a goal. It looked like we were about to get the next centre clearance. We were about to get the next centre clearance, in fact. And Tommy Powell just missed a handball to LDU. He didn't miss it massively. He just put it behind LDU on the way past. So LDU was, I think Tommy Powell got a free kick or it was a short mark. I can't remember, one of the two. LDU went past for the hand pass, got it, but Powell just hit it just behind him. LDU should have still been able to grab it, but I think it was the old he'd spent it before he had it. He fumbled it. It went up the other end for a Marty goal. And I think that really summed up some of the errors that we made across the day. There were also a couple where we just slipped over in the middle when it looked like we were about to take it away. And they're the sort of absolute killers where our defence has started reacting, or our defenders have started reacting to the fact that we've got the ball. They're pushing up, hoping to help out. And unfortunately, we turn it over in a really difficult spot and make life relatively easy for the Swans. So, yeah, we just got some simple stuff wrong. It did make the defenders look bad at times, and they didn't have a good day, but the blame, it was certainly not all them. Archer completely shut Will Haywood out of the game, so we did have one positional win behind the ball. I'll talk a little about Archer in a minute. But besides that, the Swans forwards really had a great day. Papley, McDonald, Amati, McLean, they all had their moments. And Amati and McLean would have kicked more goals if they were able to kick straight. McDonald and Papley kicked 4 each, so they made the most of it. But yeah, really, they really got off the chain, the Sydney forwards, and at times were making our backs look silly. There was a couple where they got some pretty generous free kicks. Luke McDonald got pinged for a free kick that I thought where there was absolutely no holding going on at all. And Amati got a free kick out of a throw-in stoppage inside forward 50 where, to my mind, he jumped up on top of Sherry and stopped Sherry from competing. So, you take those couple of, fortunate free kicks away, they still absolutely dominated us, the Sydney forwards. And a lot of that was due to the sumptuous ball that was coming into them, particularly from Errol Gulden, who I'll talk about shortly, but he wasn't the only one. It was, Luke Parker when he came on as the sub. Callum Mills wasn't too bad. Chad Warner was fantastic going forward and just looked like he had all the time and space in the world. So, yeah, unfortunately, the connection between the Swans mids and the forwards was a lot stronger than our connection going forward, and Just their capacity to spread. You saw it time and time again. They'd give two handballs and they're out in space and running forwards, which was a pretty rare sight for North Melbourne all day. We did kick a couple of goals with some forward handballs, but none of it looked sure. None of it looked like we had time. It was under pressure and it was scrappy, and we made it work sometimes. So I think that's probably a good summation of story of the game. It was a really tough game to watch after quarter time for us, unfortunately, and the game was lost in the second quarter, where we were only able to kick one goal to their 7, I think. There was certainly 8 unanswered goals during that period, and we've seen that at other times earlier in the season. If you concede 7 or 8 or 9 goals in a row, you're just not going to win. It's so hard to come back from that, and that proved to be the case today. In terms of the 5 stars, so if you're a new listener, this is where I give the votes to the 4 best North Melbourne players and the best opposition player. This is definitely one of those games where it was hard to find some votes, and certainly easier to find some good Sydney players than it was North Melbourne players. So, it's a bit like the Brownlow. Sometimes you can get 4 votes in a game where the bar's pretty low, and sometimes you get 1 vote in a game and you played way better, but you had some others to compete with. LDU was super unlucky last week to only get the 1 vote, and I did receive some feedback about that, which is fair. He could have very easily been second or third best on. I found those 3 really, really tough to split last week, but I thought he was our most consistent and our best player today. 24 disposals, 5 marks, 7 tackles, 4 clearances, 2 goal assists, 5 score involvements, 5 inside 50s, 5 intercepts. 6 intercepts. And I guess, you can see from that he just did a little bit of everything, tried his best all day, didn't get it all right. He did make a couple of mistakes, but I thought was clearly our best midfielder, and just did what he does. He had great burst away from stoppage, had a couple of great bursting moments where he just, didn't really have any options to give it off to, so looked a little silly at the end, but like I said, was really trying. The 7 tackles speaks to the fact that he was putting in effort. And 2 goal assists, 5 score involvements. His hard work was eventuating to something where it could. I thought, he did everything he could given what was happening around him. He didn't have a lot of help. Shees didn't have a great game. Wardlaw didn't have a great game. Tommy Power was pretty quiet. So there was just, there wasn't a lot for him to do, or there wasn't a lot of help for him in terms of getting the ball forward. Like I said, he tried his best. He was their best midfielder. So 4 votes for LDU, but he probably played. Well, I think he did play better last week. So it's just, it is what it is. Sometimes you can be the best performer in a poor side and end up getting the 4 votes, which is LDU for this week. The 3 votes I gave to Cam Zurhaar, and look, this one's let me walk you through it, because at first glance it's probably a little generous. He had 21 disposals, 2 goals, 7 marks, 2 of them contested, 2 clearances, went into the middle in the last quarter for a little bit, 6 inside 50s, 6 score involvements. He had a really quiet first half, and I thought offensively he really didn't bring a lot in the first half, but completely shut Blakey out of the game, which is no mean feat. Blakey's brings great drive, he's got great rebounding capacity for Sydney. I'd love to have Nick Blakey on our side. It's such a shame that he's ended up at Sydney. But Zurhaar really blunted his impact in that first half, and also was didn't have a lot of impact himself. So it was a bit of a. But I think we take that as a win, because Blakey would be so dangerous if he was getting a hold of it. The second half, I think there was a bit of a change, and Zurhaar was more freed up to try and have an impact, and he really did. Like I said, he kicked the 2 goals, marked it really well, went to the middle a little bit in the last quarter as well, and looked impactful. It was by no means a perfect game, but I just thought, given the fact that he had a great defensive impact in the first half, and then was able to have an impact offensively in the second half, ended up being a pretty good game for Zurhaar. He didn't do a lot wrong. And his contested marking has been so much better with those other tall forwards in the side, with Pink and Teakle in there. Like I said, I think it's their impact in the side has been most felt by Zurhaar. We were talking a lot about, we really need some help for Larkey, and we've got that help, but I think it's actually freed up Zurhaar more so than it has Larkey. So yeah, Zurhaar the 3 votes. And then speaking of Nick Larkey, I've given him the 2, 9 disposals, 3 goals, 2, 5 marks. Just made the most of his chances. He did not get a lot of opportunity. His service was pretty few and far between. But like I said, kick 3 goals, 2. Probably, he probably gets the 3 votes if he has 4 goals or 5 goals. Or he might even get best on for us if he kicked 5. But he did have 2 opportunities in the second quarter that unfortunately were both set shots that he missed. That he would have loved to hit at least one of them. That's really what held him back. But the fact that he had 9 disposals and 5 of them were scores, I think speaks to the positive impact that he was able to have when he did get service. Marked it strongly, I thought, like I said, did everything that he could with what the service that he got, so deserving of the 2 votes based on that. And then 1 vote was tricky. Simpkin was probably our next best midfielder, but really butchered it a couple of times, so I didn't feel comfortable giving it to him. Toby Pink had a great first quarter, but didn't really have a lot of impact after that. So I had to look elsewhere, and she's accumulated, but really did not have any impact, or certainly had much less of the impact that he normally had. So again, I didn't feel right giving it to him. So I've given it to Jackson Archer for the 1 vote. 4 disposals for Jacko, so not a lot of offensive impact, or nearly 0. But most importantly, he kept Will Hayward to 8 touches and absolutely 0 impact. And Will Hayward is a super dangerous high half forward type of player. He's just recently signed a massive contract, and he's super dangerous, and Archer absolutely blanketed him. It was not even close in terms of the winner of that contest. Archer was our 1 defensive matchup win, and I thought his primary job is to lock down, so there's no way that we could say that he didn't do that today. It does make you wonder if perhaps he would have been better off on Tommy Papley, because we started Callum Dawson on Papley and that did not go well. McDonald then got switched on to him in the second half and was better, but Papley still did look super dangerous across the whole game, ended up with the 4 goals. So, you'd love to have 2 Jackson Archers there. He did his job. Potentially you could have, put him on Papley, and then potentially Will Hayward gets off the chain. So, if one doesn't get you, the other will. But Archer did his job defensively, and I think despite him barely touching the footy, was deserving of a vote based on the impact that he was able to have on the game. And like I said, he won his matchup, so I think deserves the vote. You can fight me on that if you would like to. And then, like I said, Simpkin and Pink were probably next best, and Sheasel as well. But none of them I thought were good enough to get a spot on the podium for this week. In terms of the best opposition player, really, really hard to go past Errol Gulden. There was several that you could have gone with. Warner was fantastic. McDonald particularly early. That's Logan McDonald, not Luke McDonald. Was particularly good really early. He kicked his 4 goals and was marking it strongly on the lead. But Errol Gulden, 41 disposals, 8 marks, 3 tackles, 5 clearances, 3 goal assists, 738 metres gained, 15 inside 50s, 15 score involvements. You just can't argue with that stat line. He was kicking it beautifully inside 50. Dermot Brereton was waxing lyrical about it. But, he was spot on. Gulden was absolutely fantastic. You would love to have a player of his skill kick it inside 50. You can absolutely see why Dylan Stephens has got pushed out of the Sydney side in the past couple of years, because Gulden is just something else. His left foot is lethal. So you could not go past his impact across the totality of the game. McDonald was fantastic early. I thought I'd be giving it to him early. And Chad Warner does some flashy things. He looks fantastic, and he was great. Don't get me wrong. I think he had 29 touches, kicked a couple of goals, could have kicked a couple of others. So potentially if he'd filled his boots and kicked 4, there's more of a competition for best on for the opposition player. But Gulden killed us on the wing. And he does have that capacity to go in and play an inside game as well. We would love to have either Bailey Scott or Dylan Stephens giving us half of that impact, because Gulden just killed us all day, unfortunately. So in terms of the North Podium standings, We've got 6 weeks left, so it is now really heading into the pointy end of the season, and LDU's 4 votes takes him to 29 and sitting 1 vote behind Sheasel. So Sheasel still leads the way on 30. LDU on 29 is in the silver medal position, and Tristan Sherry bronze medaling on 24. Zurhaar's votes also then has elevated him up to 4th spot with 11, and then it's Powell and Comben on 10, Wardlaw and McKercher on 9. So interesting. Zurhaar's second half of the year really elevated him up to that 4th spot, and I certainly didn't think that we'd be seeing that based on his first half of the year. I will talk a little bit about Zurhaar later on, but it's actually surprising. He's had a sneaky good year overall based on the last 6 or 7 weeks that he's played. So anyway, like I said, I'll talk about that in a little bit more detail in a minute. This is the part of the podcast where I just like to do a quick call to action. Please share the podcast out with any North Melbourne fans that you know. Help me get the word out there. Let anyone that you know about it. There's plenty of room on the North Melbourne bandwagon heading into future years. Now's the time to jump on. Probably maybe not after this game, but after the previous 4 or 5 games, we were looking good. So please do help me spread the word. Subscribe on your chosen podcast service and give me a review on Apple or Spotify if you can. It really helps other people see the podcast, and you can get involved with my social accounts, primarily Twitter and Instagram and YouTube at NorthPod Show. The podcast is also up on YouTube if that's where you like to consume your content. And if you were after another way to support the show, I do have a Buy Me a Coffee link. It's in the show notes. It's buymeacoffee.com/NorthPodShow. It's just a way to help support me and support the show. And I'd like to thank Richard Jennings for buying me 3 coffees this week. Really appreciate the kind words, Richard, and thank you for being a listener. I love all of my listeners. I love the North Melbourne supporter fan base, and I love the North Pod community that I've been able to build over the past year and a half or so. So I really appreciate you for listening, and thank you for all the support. It's now time for us to have a look at the negatives, and as you can imagine, there was no shortage of negatives to choose from for this match review. I'm going to start at the source, and like I alluded to earlier, I do think Tristan Sherry was beaten probably for the first time this year. No, I don't know about that. Like, he's had a couple of games where I thought he's drawn even, but I do think Grundy edged him today, and particularly in the hitouts. I think around the ground they were pretty similar, although Grundy did kick a goal, whereas Sherry was unable to have that forward impact. But the hit-out differential for the teams was 20 more to Sydney, and there was just so many times where Sherry got out-muscled by Grundy, which is not something that we've seen happen this year. And probably less so being out-muscled, but just being... Grundy hit Sherry at the right times when he was off balance, when he was, not positioning himself correctly. He was made to look silly by Grundy at times in the ruck contests, and that really hurt our capacity to do much from clearance. He wasn't awful, Sherry, by any means, and he did try to compete, but I just think Sherry was able to tap it down to our mids less often, and that is part of what didn't allow us to transition the ball effectively from stoppage going forward. The spread, Sydney was able to get us on the spread, whereas we weren't able to. It was a lot of what we've seen this year. Sure, the clearance battle was relatively even, but the quality of clearance was quite different. And I think that started with Sherry in the ruck. So a down game for him. He's had a super year, and I think what's probably important for us to remember, and what I was kind of thinking about as I was watching the game, was if this is a bad game as Sherry plays, I think we're in for a great time, because there's no shame in being beaten by Brodie Grundy, and he wasn't soundly beaten. I thought around the ground he was pretty solid, took a couple of marks, tackled strongly like he has all year. It was just the actual ruck contests themselves that he was beaten, and like I said, Grundy being able to go forward and kick a goal also makes a difference. So if this is his bottom, I think, we've really found a ruckman this year. He's had some fantastic games, has Tristan. So, you're allowed to have a bad one, and I thought he had a bad game, but not an awful game. And unfortunately, Grundy just got the better of him. And even when Teakle went in there, he got ragdolled as well. So just not a good day for us in the ruck, and you could see that was part of the reason why the Sydney mids were able to get on top of us, but certainly not the only reason. Second negative, I think it was pretty obvious. After quarter one, we were just unable to stop the Swans' ball movement. And they just did it. They did it every way. They went through the corridor, or they went around the boundary line with some really accurate kicking, and then just found a way to break down the zone and get out the back and give their forwards one-on-one opportunities. Just time and time again, we saw it. Gulden and Warner involved in chains through that middle third of the ground, and the Swans just really outnumbered us at contests, and we were unable to put enough pressure on them to stop their spread. All it really took was one good kick to break us open, and I think part of that is, the challenge for us was setting up defensively on an unfamiliar ground, but it's a smaller ground. In theory, it should be easier to, set up defensively and fill those gaps because there's less gaps to fill. Potentially the different shape makes a difference there, but you could tell that our defensive structure just wasn't quite as sound as it would be at Marvel, for example, where we're a little bit more familiar with the dimensions. But it was also just the Swans' capacity to hit that one good kick, and once they hit that one inbound kick, or even the one down the line, which allowed the next one to get time and space, they just did it so easily and gave themselves time to keep passing it through the zone and cut us up, really. So, it wasn't just Gulden, Warner. There were some of those unsung heroes like Campbell, for example, that also I thought had a pretty solid game. And this is what led to the massive inside 50 discrepancy. I don't know if I mentioned it earlier, but I should have. It was 64 inside 50s to 39. So 25 more inside 50s for the Swans. And you felt that in the game. The ball really did live inside the Swans 50. That being said, because they were so effective at scoring, it often went back to the middle of the ground. So, it was just a real exercise in getting dominated through that transition through the ground. City cut us up, and that just allowed, Papley and Logan McDonald to get off the chain and kick 4 goals each. Like I said earlier, Elmac did quieten Papley, but he wasn't able to completely shut him out. Dawson, I thought it was worth a go. It was a strange, but I don't mind the decision from the coaching staff to try Callan Dawson on Papley. Dawson does have some legs. He's quick, but he just didn't quite have the change of direction and the agility to go with Papley. I think on the lead, in a straight line, I think Callan Dawson could probably match it, but we saw a couple of times Papley just really leave him for dead with his agility and his change of direction. So, unfortunately, the speed of ball movement from the Swans after quarter time just allowed their forwards some really good opportunities, and we weren't able to quell them. So, in the first quarter, it looked like we were going to be able to compete. They certainly figured things out after that, the Swans, and we didn't have any answers, unfortunately. You could tell at half time we made a couple of adjustments, but nothing that was able to stop the run on, unfortunately. And that's what ended up making it an 80-point belting. The final negative, it's kind of a bit of a catch-all, but we just made some really simple errors that, took me back to the dark ages a little bit, took me back to the dark days that we've had over the past couple of years, where we just made some really silly mistakes that the opposition was able to punish. Curtis Taylor in the last quarter dropped a mark inside 50. He heard the footsteps and spilt a chest mark that he should have taken. The game was well and truly done by that point, but I did think that was a bit emblematic of how our day went. It was a really simple skill error. You certainly couldn't blame fatigue, given he'd come on as a sub. He'd probably played 15 or 20 minutes of footy at that point. So, I think he heard footsteps and spilt a mark that he should have taken. That, just like it did all game, he spilt that. The Swans then went coast to coast and scored. Shields was the one that was subbed off in the third quarter. He had a pretty quiet game. Taylor came on and had some touches, but I certainly think that his position on the list for next season has to be at some risk. He struggled to get a game for the first half of the year, and he's come on and had some impact in the second half, but I just don't know if he's had enough to justify getting another contract. And the last 2 weeks he's been sub, and it's pretty difficult to have an impact as the sub. And I don't know that he had much of an impact today, other than dropping that mark. Sheasel, like I said, he accumulated. He played a bit more behind the footy than he has in recent weeks. I think he had 29 touches, but made some mistakes. He hit Luke Parker inside defensive 50 when we were trying to exit, which was pretty uncharacteristic by him. And Parker kicked his second goal. Elmac also picked out an absolute beauty of a kick to a Sydney player inside defensive 50 when we were trying to exit. It was one of those ones where he knew as soon as it came off his boot, he was apologising before the Sydney player had even marked it. McKercher had a really tough game trying to get it out of defensive 50 as well. So you can get a sense for where things were going wrong. Although those two that I mentioned were late, McKercher all game really struggled to get it out, and he tried. So he had the right idea, but oftentimes kind of got himself stuck trying to take the game on. Paul Curtis, I mentioned him last week. And the thing that I said was I'd love him to stamp out these silly free kick againsts out of his game. And he had another one today where, we'd done the hard work. We'd got the ball inside 50. It was kicked to a contest, and he, was out of position. So he pushed his player illegally and gave away a silly free kick. And it's so frustrating to see him do these things when he has he has star ability in that he can do some things that very few people can. He's got fantastic quick hands. He's super strong for his size, but time and time again, he finds himself in these situations where he's making poor choices or getting frustrated and giving away free kicks. So another one of those today, which is really disappointing, and particularly given how much we struggled to get the ball inside 50, to give it up so easily is not ideal. Speaking of the inside 50s, we had some shockers. Jai Simpkin in particular had a really bad one in the second quarter. We'd done the hard work. We sort of passed the ball around to try and relieve some pressure and then give ourselves a good chance to kick it inside 50. And he kicked it to the fourth of probably one option, to be honest. Ended up being a Swans uncontested mark inside our forward 50. So that was the worst, but there were some others where we just didn't lower the eyes. We tried to bomb it long where it wasn't on, and unfortunately the Swans lap up those opportunities. I've talked about it already with the Powell and the LDU handball mishap, which was pretty emblematic of how things went. So all of these little things, or some of them little, some of them are big, but all of these incidents kind of, just stifled any momentum that we had or were trying to build, unfortunately. That Powell LDU handball one was absolutely the symbol, I guess, of, we just kicked a goal, we're about to go for another clearance, and we throw away all of our momentum, and it ends up going the other way for a Sydney goal. So all of that sort of created a really hard afternoon for our defenders, and like I said, they battled. They were certainly beaten, most of them, but I don't think it was all their fault, because sometimes those errors that we made either in the middle of the ground or in the defensive half just killed us. And Sydney were really good after quarter time at taking advantage of those opportunities. In terms of the positives to come out of the game, like I've alluded to earlier, there were some matchup wins. Archer over Will Haywood, Zurhaar over Nick Blakey. The fact that Larkey was able to snag 5 shots on goal from his limited access to the footy, I think you could say that he also won his matchup. But the Archer and the Zurhaar ones were fantastic, because both of those players are super dangerous players in Haywood and Blakey, and Archer and Zurhaar took them out of it. So to have those sort of wins in a 79-point loss, that's kind of what you have to take out of it. I think if we speak about Archer for a little bit, it's a real symbol of his development this year. We saw that he got absolutely pantsed by Bobby Hill against Collingwood, but he's had some fantastic wins. Besides that one performance, he's played 17 or 18 games of AFL football now, and I think that's probably what we have to remember as fans. Is he is so young in his career. I think he's 21 now. And, he looks like a mini Glenn Archer. There's so many of the things that he does that, look like the Glenn that we saw for so many games for North Melbourne. He's really starting to show that he could be a medium-sized defender for the future that's got some real Flexibility, the capacity to play small, the capacity to play as a third tall if you need potentially, but certainly on the mediums. And, he didn't have it today, but he certainly has the capacity to intercept mark and to do some rebounding. We've seen some really clean disposals from him in the past weeks as well. So he had a fantastic game, Jacko Archer, and I think it's worth just kind of talking about his development because, he had struggled with some injuries and had to play a bit of VFL footy, but his form since the bye or in the second half of the year since he's gotten into the side has been fantastic. And similarly, Zurhaar's been the same. His form since the bye has been fantastic. There's been some talk this week that potentially he's a little closer to signing for North Melbourne. It hasn't happened yet, and he is a free agent, so I'm not counting my chickens till I can see those eggs. But his form since the bye has been fantastic, and the fact that he was able to switch gears and a couple of times during this game because he played that sort of unselfish defensive role on Blakey. Then in the third quarter, he was able to cut loose and, hit the scoreboard and get involved in the forward line and then finally inject himself into the midfield a little bit in that last quarter. Yeah, really all-round performance from Zurhaar, and I think it's pretty easy to overlook the fact that he's our second goal kicker for the year, behind Larkey, obviously. And, first half of the year we weren't kicking many goals. He's been kicking goals now that we've been playing some better football. Like I mentioned earlier, I think whilst he really had a quiet start to the year, he has been able to kick a goal here or there and take his opportunities when they've arisen. And particularly in the last 6 weeks or so, he's been able to kick, 1 or 2 or 3 each week, which has added to his tally. So if he can keep up this form to the end of the year, he would have, probably put together a good half a season of football, which is not what it was looking like at the start of the year. I do wonder if potentially if he has made his decision, maybe that's a little bit of a mental release. Who knows? He may not have actually made his decision at all. But usually when there's smoke, there's fire, and potentially we'll see some contract talks heat up in the near future. In terms of other positives, I think, in quarter one, our game plan was successful and it did create Sydney errors with our pressure. Sydney also was probably a little bit sloppy. I think there was a bit of column A, a bit of column B, but we did create some of that, and you could see, we were down by 2 points at quarter time. We were in the game. Unfortunately, Sydney adapted too well after that. But I think holistically, and some people might disagree, and that's fine, I think our effort was there for most of the game. Probably up to 3/4 time, I think, our effort was really there. The sting and the effort really, the value in putting effort in after 3/4 time, the sting's out of the game. There's not a lot to be gained. You're just playing for the final siren at that point. But I do think that our effort was there to that point. It was just our structure that let us down. We were chasing, we were attempting to put on pressure, but unfortunately our structures broke down, and that meant that it looked like Sydney got a lot more uncontested footy in there. Like I've mentioned a million times, their spread gave them a bit more space. But I don't think that was due to a lack of effort by most of our players. I think that was more so due to our structure breaking down. So, yeah, I think quarter one was a sign of what it can look like when it goes well. It would be interesting to see kind of what our stoppage setups looked like in the first quarter as compared to the rest of the game, and whether or not, there were some adjustments that Sydney made that significant difference or not. But yeah, I'd honestly believe that our effort was there at least for the first 3 quarters. It just wasn't, converting to turnovers, and we weren't quite there. We were just a little bit off the pace, and didn't execute well enough. Sure, there were some broken tackles, and I've talked about that ad nauseum in the past. I don't necessarily think that broken tackles is a lack of effort. I think often it's a lack of skill execution, which certainly is something that has let us down in the past. So, yeah, I think quarter one, you've got to take some positives from that. And then finally, just moments. And one of the big moments that you could talk about was Toby Pink's first quarter. Had a fantastic first quarter, had a great contested mark that he then went back and kicked the goal from outside 50 or sort of on 50 with a great roost. Also kicked a goal on the run. So a contested mark and 2 goals in the first quarter, and we're thinking, Toby Pink's on. Didn't really get near it for the rest of the game. So, sort of reverted back to the norm there. But, some fantastic moments for him. And that's all we need from him and Teakle. I talked about that last week. We just need them to play their role so that the others can fit into the structure. And that's what allows Larkey to have 5 shots on goal and Zurhaar to get involved. Teakle did have a couple of marks up the ground. He was a bit more quiet than he was last week. Pink probably was the second star in the forward line as opposed to Teakle in terms of the tools. But yeah, Pink's first quarter was fantastic, and he does have a bit of cult hero in him. I think it is the red head, but I think people would love to see Toby Pink go well, and he had a fantastic first quarter. I thought Bailey Scott and Dylan Stevens had some good moments of penetration during the game. Obviously well beaten by Errol Gulden, but it wasn't their worst games on the wings. I thought at times they had some good run and carry and long kicking that wasn't necessarily bad. I know that's probably setting the bar pretty low for them, but at times it's been hard to be positive about both them this year. So yeah, I thought they had solid games. We saw Wardlaw's attack on the footy. It was great to have his invigoration back in the side, but yeah, he didn't have a good game. He was sloppy. His kicking was off. He nearly missed it altogether. But he was hard at it. He tried. And that's kind of what I was alluding to earlier. His effort was there. There's probably not going to be a time where you'll ever say that Georgie Wardlaw's not trying, but his execution was poor today. His disposal efficiency was poor. Hopefully he'll be better for the run. Hopefully he's not feeling any more effects from those that concussion that he got at training. But yeah, he was really hard at it and just ferocious around the ball. And yeah, I think just in closing thoughts on that, it's probably now that my attention turns more to kind of list decisions for the end of the year, which I alluded to with Curtis Taylor earlier. I think every game now is information feedback to make those decisions. It's Liam Shields is another one where you go, do we get another year out of him? Curtis Taylor is, I think, into his 6th year of footy, so have we seen the sort of player that he's going to be? And I think the challenge is always, we delisted Mason Wood whenever that was, end of 2020 or end of 2021, and he's gone on to be a fantastic wingman at St Kilda. You don't want to delist that player that, goes on to be something somewhere else. But most times you're delisting a player and you know that's it for them, that you've tried your best. And so, there are going to be a few players or several players that we delist come the end of the year that just, for whatever reason, their development hasn't happened. And I do wonder if that's going to be someone like Curtis Taylor. There's plenty of others that are out of contract. Like Bailey Scott will be offering a contract. It's just whether or not he wants to take it up. Zurhaar's the same, but then there's players like Blake Drury, for example, who they've been on the rookie list for 2 years now, so it becomes a challenge what we do with a player like him. Anyway, it's going to be interesting to see over the next 6 weeks what other decisions or what other information we get on those players that are out of contract. Curtis Taylor is definitely a watch for that. I think that will do us for the match roundup. There is a little bit of VFL news to talk about, not really any other ancillary news from North Melbourne for this week. So I will touch on the VFL. And like I said, they got a win. They were playing the morning game, so before the AFL game they were playing this week, and beat the Swans in a thriller, 84-79. Got out to a pretty significant lead and then got ran down, but were good enough to kick a goal late to Cooper Harvey to get back out in front and win it. It was one of those ones where it's dribbling towards goal and he was lucky enough or good enough to get in the right spot to get a toe poke onto it and kick the goal. So, yeah, he kicked 2 goals for the game, Cooper Harvey. As you expect in a win, there was some good performers. Hugh Greenwood did the usual, 21 disposal and 12 tackles, so he's right there waiting if we do want someone else either forward of the ball or in the middle. Zachy Fisher came back from his foot injury and had 27 disposals, so he looks like he's fit. I don't know if there's space for him in the side, but he looks like he's fit and ready to go if we want him back. Hanson Jr. kicked 2 goals. Tyler Sellers kicked 2 goals. Zane Dersma kicked 3, so the AFL listed players were doing some great goal kicking. Willfield, 22 disposals and 7 clearances, was solid. Griffin Lowe got through again, so it'll be interesting to see if we want to get him back into the side next week. Playing Carlton, which is certainly a side that you'd want to have some tools in for. Finbar Maley dropped mark of the year very nearly. He's in some fantastic form, although didn't do a lot in this particular game. But he like I said, got up really high and just spilt the mark. That's probably it. Lazaro had 24, Bergman had 17. So there's plenty of players there that did enough to suggest that if we're looking for a specific positional change, there's some players there. Personally, I've been on the record as saying I'd like to see Zane Duursma get back in for a couple of games to end the year, and him kicking 3 goals, is probably, you'd certainly want to bring him in some good form. So it's good that he's able to kick 3. Potentially, I'd love to see him when we're playing the likes of Richmond and West Coast and Hawthorn towards the end. I don't know if we want to bring him back against someone like Carlton this week, because I don't know that we're going to get a lot of service when we play Carlton, but who knows? That's the VFL news. Good to have some form, players running around there. And like I said, next week's game is against Carlton. It is Sunday, July 21st. It's the last game of the round, the twilight game at Marvel Stadium, 4:40 p.m. We obviously got belted by Carlton earlier in the year in the Good Friday game. That was a pretty tough watch. So hopefully we can be more competitive this time. Our defensive structures are a lot more set than they were earlier in the year. So we know that Curnow and Mackay really caused us some trouble last time, and no doubt they will again. Carlton's playing as I record this. Let's see how they're going. It's 3/4 time, and they're currently down by 10 points, the Dogs, which is interesting. The Dogs looked like they were done last week, and now they're beating Carlton. But Mackay's kicked 3... Curnow's kicked 2 goals, 4. They're in some good form. So it's going to take an effort, and it's going to take us probably stifling Cripps and Walsh in the middle part of the ground, which we can do. It's just whether or not our midfielders have a good day. So it is our second tough match in a row, obviously coming up against the Swans, who are the ladder leaders. Now we've got Carlton, and then finishing that run off, we've got Geelong down in Tasmania. So it's a rough trot for these 3 games, but if we get through this, we've got 3 out of 4 games against some lesser sides in Hawthorn, West Coast and Richmond, alongside the Dogs, actually. And by the time we're playing the Dogs, their season might be over, which, could give us an opportunity like we had against the Suns late last year, or they might be playing for their season and they're hungrier. Who knows? It could go one of 2 ways, really. But in terms of the game against Carlton, I just think we need to see some competitiveness. We need to see more of what we saw from us today in quarter 1. And if we can bring that and compete and go down by 20 or 30 points, I think most fans could cop that. Given Carlton's playing for a top 4 spot for this year, and in really good form. But, I just really don't want us to see us get blown out like we were earlier in the year and like we did against the Swans. You're allowed one bad game in every now and then, but if we cop 2 or 3 beltings in a row, I think it would undo a lot of that good work that we've had from the past 6 or so weeks. So hopefully that's what we see down at Marvel. Be interesting to see what the crowd for that's like. A Sunday twilight game's never a super popular time slot, but I guess we'll see. But yeah, I think that's going to do me for the podcast for this week. I'm about to head into term 3 as the school term starts. So my favourite term, as a bit of trivia for you, I love term 3. I won't bore you with the details, but it's a great term. So hopefully North can play some good footy. I can do some good teaching, and we can head into some good vibes for the second half of the year. I do hope that you have a fantastic week. Hopefully the boys unpack the loss and, do some good work on the track, and we can have a competitive game against Carlton. And I will speak to you at some point after that Carlton game. Have a fantastic week. Go North. Thanks for listening to another episode of North Pod. If you give me a rating or review on your podcast service, that would be much appreciated. And please follow me on all social media at North Pod Show. I'm on X or Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, and I'm also very active on the North Melbourne subreddit. Hope you'll join me for the next episode.